Yes, yes, y'all. It's iconic. I know I've been gone for a minute, but I'm back today, and we're taking a look at some of the Diablo 4 controversy that's been going on. The devs have an interview here where they're answering questions about some of the community concerns, so let's check it out. And real quick, before we get into it, I just wanted to give you guys a quick update. I know I haven't posted anything recently, and I've been actually grinding a little bit on Diablo 4. I didn't really get a chance to play it. I was having issues with my computer setup with it, and I was just getting crazy crashes. I finally figured out what the problem was, so I've dived back in, and I've actually been enjoying my time. I can see where the issues are, though, and I can definitely see now that I'm getting into the higher levels. I'm almost level 60, that the game definitely takes a little bit of a dive at that point. So not here to necessarily share my thoughts on the game right this second, but just wanted to let you guys know what's going on with the channel, what I've been doing. But yeah, let's check out this interview with the devs here.
I'm Chris Wilson, production director over the live service for Diablo 4.
And I'm Rod Ferguson, general manager of all things Diablo.
So Season 2 is going to be launching on October 17th, and it's called The Season of Blood. We're really excited because this is going to be a new vampire threat is essentially invading Sanctuary. And so there's going to be a new quest line.
Didn't we see this coming?
So the player will be partnering with a new character named Eris, who's being voiced by Gemma Chan. So we're super excited to have her join our really, a great ensemble of voice talent. And she thinks she's going to be a great fit for the game. And on top of that, the character is going to gain access to new vampiric powers that you'll be able to use across all of the different classes to take.
Okay, so if this is going to be exactly how the malignant hearts work, I don't know about that. I mean, it definitely brought the power back that they nerfed from us, but there wasn't anything really too interesting to this. Like, these powers need to be attached to legendary items. We need to have maybe some skills. I don't know exactly how you work it out, but I mean, if it's just another item that you're going to sock it in like gems, I don't know if that's all that interesting for Season 2. We need a banger. We need a W.
Take out the new vampire threat that's invaded Sanctuary. So we'll have new legendary items and weapons, new uniques, and it's really going to provide a whole new way to kind of like progress with your character and a new power fantasy.
Yeah, and then that's sort of the theme and story side of it, and then obviously with each season, as part of a live service, we want to do quality of life and make changes to the game, sort of in the end game as well. And so one example of that is in Season 2, we're introducing 5 new additional bosses. Because we look at, what is the progress you make from level, say, 50 to 100. And we wanted to have more milestones along the way where you can be like, oh, I can test my build.
So real quick, I mean, that is the problem with the game is, I mean, the campaign is amazing. The world, the settings, the graphics, like what they've done, the bones are there, but there's not enough content. There's not enough activities or fulfilling or rewarding activities from 50 to 100. And specifically, once you get past about level 70, 75, it seems like, and I can definitely see that because I'm already starting to run some nightmare dungeons and things get really repetitive that there's just not enough there. So, I mean, some new in-game bosses are cool. I mean, if we don't have a way to completely just farm them over and over again and be able to really, truly target farm some of these items that people are looking for, if it's just another Uber Lilith, like you get to 100 and then you've got a few more bosses, yes, maybe that's a little more lifeblood into the game, but truly there needs to be some sort of additional content or activity that gets added into the end game.
Build against these certain types of bosses. And we also know there's a huge desire for our uniques and the Uber uniques because they have a very low drop rate and sometimes they really...
Low drop rate? You can't find those things. Like they don't drop. They don't drop.
Solidify your build. And so now with these 5 new bosses, you can actually target uniques and you can go and have a much higher drop rate on an Uber unique than you would in the open world.
Those 5 bosses, obviously it's interesting because the way people approach this kind of stuff now is they're very invested. So like at the same time as being excited, there's a level of cynicism towards everything that is coming out. So I saw the...
You think? A level of cynicism?
5 bosses, excitement. And then immediately people were like, are they just going to be reskins of a boss that we know 5 times? So can you talk about like
that's
what
a good
those 5
question.
bosses will actually entail?
It's a mixture of sort of like
Real quick on that question, I don't know if I would have thought about it that way or asked the question that way, but it's actually a good question. Are these new bosses? Are they just reskins? Because we see a lot of the same bosses over and over in the game.
new and sort of one of the things we heard a lot from players was like, I don't think we've ever even talked much about it, where the bosses are coming from, but there's a notion of like, I play these campaign bosses and I didn't necessarily get to fight them ever again unless I'm playing the campaign. So that's part of the inspiration. Yep. So there's going to be definitely like ways we can leverage content we've had, but also new content as well. And so that, but the fact that we're doing it in the seasonal and the eternal is going to be really exciting. And again, that idea of like, we've heard a lot of feedback around the Uber unique. So, and what's really interesting is that actually it's a boss ladder. So it's not like in Diablo 2 where you would just go and farm a boss over and over and over and over again. There's actually sort of prerequisites to be able to summon a boss that you'll have to go through the bosses to get there. And so it's actually has its own gameplay involved in even having a boss appear.
What happens
with so that's a little interesting that they said it's a ladder and you got to go through some gameplay mechanics to summon the boss. I think he answered that question well, but if you're saying we can target farm it, but then we have to go through all these gameplay mechanics, like you just want to be able to run a boss as quickly as you can. I don't understand sometimes what they're thinking here. I mean, again, it's yet to be seen, so I don't want to judge it yet, but literally if you're trying to target farm a boss, like you just want to be able to beat that boss and then jump back in, beat that boss, jump back in, whatever you got to do it. But if you've got to go through a whole slew of gameplay mechanics to summon the boss, and you're going to need materials, and I don't know if this is it. Again, we haven't seen it yet, so I don't want to judge it too hard, but we just want to play the game.
when something goes out into the world, when do you start to pick up on the general sentiment from the audience? What is it, data points? Is it social media? How do you know what the sentiment is?
They're on Reddit. They know what's going on. They're watching these content creators. There's no way they're not.
So with live service development, I mean, we're always paying attention to the community. So we're looking at all sources of feedback. We solicit surveys to some of our players. So we use that as one kind of funnel for.
Did my dude just say, he said surveys, right? Or it's 2023. We're talking about surveys? I know that's not okay, I'm gonna let him keep going. Surveys.
Information. We look at telemetry and data that's like coming back from like, the back end.
Okay,
so we kind of see where there are pain points or friction.
I mean the true data
from just looking at data. But then also we're paying attention to, forums. When we do a blog post or release patch notes, we're trying to look at like, what is the response? What are things that are coming back from the community? And we use that to kind of help inform some of the, decision points for the future. And so what's great with the live service is like between seasons, patches, hot fixes, there's numerous kind of vehicles for us to kind of like inject change and evolve the game for the future. And it's always in pursuit of making the best possible experience for the players.
Yeah, it's one of the big challenges is really around the idea of the vocal minority. Like sometimes a very small group can be very loud, and that's why we use things like surveys. Like, because you're always managing sort of
talking shit,
the qualitative information you get, where people's just opinions, and then the quantitative information you have, which is the actual data that shows what's actually happening. And it's in a game where it's sort of built on a power fantasy. Like, everybody loves candy, right? And so but you can't have candy all the time. And so that's one of the hard parts about managing.
Yes, you can. I'm a grown-ass man.
Sometimes there's a little bit of medicine and you need some sugar to go with it, right? And so as we're looking at our feedback and we're looking at what we need to do to balance the world, because we want every build to be playable and we want every build to be viable. And so sometimes you have to sort of manage that across all the different classes and all the different builds. And sometimes you need a little medicine. And I think one of the things as we look at season 1, we want to really show that we're being responsive and reactive and being agile, but we sort of got.
All right, I don't want to completely dump on them. I'm not trying to make this like all negative. Like they have responded. They have put out some patches. They have told us why they've made some of the changes, and he's given us this analogy before about the medicine and the sugar. And obviously, you can't just put out a patch of nerfs, especially right before season starts. I don't know who made that decision, what they were thinking. Obviously, that you can't do that. You just can't do that. Especially people have been playing the game, building up their characters. They're starting to know what works. They're getting an idea of what they want to do for season 1, and then you nerf everything. Like, where was the sugar? oh, it wasn't ready. So if it wasn't ready, screw it. You know, you don't need to put out that patch. Then you wait 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. Like, I, I don't understand that decision. But I want to circle back real quick to the vocal minority because that kind of stands out. I mean, the vocal minority, are you talking about content creators? Are you talking about the people on the forums? Because there's definitely a sentiment in the community that people are not happy with the game. The game is boring. Like, there's not enough to do. The itemization is pretty weak. It's tedious. It's time consuming. And the way that games have come out in the past few years, like Diablo is just following that trend that we've gotten a half a game, or, you know, 3/4. And I won't even say 3/4. We've gotten like half a game. And like, yes, again, I will praise the campaign all day. I will praise the design of the game. The combat feels amazing. Things are fluid. But when you break it down to the actual gameplay mechanics, and like once you get past the campaign, like there's not a lot there. Now, again, I'm not saying I am enjoying my time. And maybe it's because I'm coming from Diablo Immortal, where you got to buy all your power and I can just create a character and do my thing and level it up. Like that's what I like to do. I love to theory craft. I love to come up with builds, but I don't think it's the vocal minority that are saying these things about the game. Everybody's saying these things about the game. I would say it's an overwhelming majority of people feel this way about the game. And if you brought us into early access or beta for Diablo 4 and you had to rush the game out, like you knew what was coming. There's no way you didn't know what was coming. I don't want to harp on that too long, but yeah, I don't like the way he put that with the vocal minority.
2/3 of the way there, and we had a lot of the medicine, but we didn't have the sugar yet. And so, but to be able to act quickly, we sort of said, well, that's good. We've got the fix, but when we didn't bring and here's the other fun part that makes that balance work. And so I think that's part of the criticism of season 1 is that we did the medicine, didn't quite yet do the sugar, and then we've been doing the sugar as we go now. And it was something our game director talked about in one of the live streams, is that moving forward, anytime we have to do any sort of significant balance, we'll always have that other side of it, like, because it's really about, you know, we're making the game for player joy. We're making the game the best game we can for players, and so, but sometimes they have to have a salad. They can't have ice cream for dinner every night, you know, and so you just have to kind of balance your messaging, manage expectations, communicate more openly, and I think we're doing that now as we go into season 2.
You mentioned it earlier, but how do you account for the vocal minority in a way that feels like you're speaking to them, but also not balancing that with the realistic kind of achievements that you can do? Because it's obviously like...
Who's coming up with these questions? Again, vocal minority, whatever.
Diablo 4 comes out, everyone's super positive, and everyone is like really up on it, and the vast majority of people are enjoying it. But then the conversation quickly turns into like, this is missing, that is missing. But that conversation is very much defined and pushed by...
Because it is missing.
A group of people that are at level 100 or 80, and they're the only people that are like really vocal. Right. So it can seem like when people are looking at it, oh, this is a really pervasive issue, and it's actually just a small group of people. How do you like approach that, and is there anything that you do to try and tell your own team, like, hey, I know it looks like this, but we have to think about everyone, and how do you message that out as well?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think
okay, I got to see how he's going to answer this, but again, like, the point of the game right now is to get to 100, and the grind is such a slog. Like, people don't want to grind to 100. I feel like I put in some time the last couple of weeks trying to level my character up, and I'm only to 60. Like, I got a long way to go to get to 100. So if the vast majority of people aren't even making it to 100 or even 80, like, you got a problem with your game there. But there's nothing to do from 50 to 100. So I got to see how he answers this. I got to see.
Quantitative data really helps there, so you can actually see what's happening with the game, and you can go like, oh, you know, this might be an issue for people who are level 100, and this is the percentage of people who have actually gotten there so far, and we can sort of look at how big of an issue that actually is. But I mean, I don't want to say vocal minority to be dismissive, because sometimes that vocal minority are also your influencers, and the people who are, you know, the tastemakers who will be like, hey, this is how we feel about it, and you want to take that in as well. And that's why it's always is a balance between knowing what are we hearing and what are we seeing in the game and what are we feeling when we play. And I think that notion of like, hey, one of the things we were excited about with D4 is that as a mainline game, no other Diablo game actually had any end game at all. Like when the campaign rolled credits, you were done. And so we were really happy with D4 to have Helltide and Nightmare Dungeons and the Tree of Whispers and PvP. And so we felt like this was a great starting place. And so when we talked, even if you go back to our interviews pre-launch, we would talk about this is the beginning and not the ending of Diablo. This is a foundation we're building upon. And you're seeing that, like in season 2 with these 5 additional bosses, in season 3 we're going to be bringing in leaderboards. Like this is an evolution of a game over time. And so the notion that you can kind of grind your way to 100 and go like, what the heck, where's everything I was expecting? Like all that stuff is being layered in over time as we go, and we're continuing to make the game,
You don't have time, bro. You don't have time. Okay, if people have already put in, it's like 100-ish hours to get to level 100 on a character. If you're really, really grinding, like you could take longer than that. If this is your first character and you're playing through the campaign and taking your time, you could probably get there around 80 to 90 hours, I think, roughly, if you're blasting through. But they're right. You get to 100 and there's nothing to do. So like, what are you even talking about? And the point that you made that the other games didn't have end game, again, I'll say the same thing. It's 2023, bro. You got competitors out here. You got people that's coming for the ARPG throne that Diablo used to have, Diablo 2 specifically. You kind of dropped the ball with Diablo 3 and you made it better over time, but I mean, this was years and years down the road. And Diablo 3, there really wasn't any end game if you're really, really talking about it. And now you're competing with games like Path of Exile. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know, if you're competing against yourself and you're setting the bar against yourself and that's all you want to look at, fine. Go that route. But if we are really sitting here and we're going to talk about, oh, we did Helltides, we did Nightmare Dungeons, at a certain point, the only thing you can do is Nightmare Dungeons. That's all you can do in the game. So it's basically Diablo 3. You got Greater Rifts, you got Nightmare Dungeons. Woo.
Better and better. So it really is just sort of like, definitely take in what you hear, but also, trust but verify. Go and see what the data is telling you as well.
In addition to that, I think the other important piece of this is transparency, right? So we're really trying to create and be open with our community about setting expectations. Like, here's what we're trying to do in the near future, releasing patch notes early, really just having live streams, the campfire chats, letting our audience know, like, here's what we're trying to do in the short term. Here are things we want to even do in the medium term, like he mentioned leaderboards for season 3. Like, we're trying to just be more open about that information versus
Joe
always holding
Shelley
everything
looks like
to
he
the
done
vest.
aged like 10
And Joe in our
years
last,
since this game
he
has
talked
come
about
out.
philosophy. Like, here's why we're doing certain things. Because I think it's one thing to say what you're doing, another thing to say why you're doing it. And so I think helping people understand, like, oh, this is our goal.
Why
this is what we're
doing
trying to
something.
accomplish, and just give some background to why these decisions are being made.
You guys have been quite candid with, the patch came out and it nerfed some stuff, and you're like, okay, we did it wrong, we won't do that again. And then you talk about all the vehicles you have to kind of approach it. How do you feel about the expectation that creates? Because it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Where you're like, oh, we can like react, but then the expectation from the audience is when they demand something, they need it immediately. And they're like, why do you put it? How do you guys as developers feel about that? And how do you try and manage those expectations?
It is a balancing act, depending on what it is we're trying to address. I mean, it can obviously take development time to get it right? You don't want to be too hasty to just rush, change, because you may end up like imbalancing the game in a different way that you maybe didn't foresee. So you have to take your time to really think through, like, okay, how do we want to address the problem that's been flagged? Look at it in terms of priority as well. There's oftentimes competing priorities, so it's like making sure you're targeting the thing that's going to have the biggest.
Look at how Rod's looking at him. Like, hey, you better answer this question right. You better.
Impact for the player first and foremost, and then finding the right time to release those things. And so it's just really a balancing act that our leadership and our designers have to really kind of like work through for each issue as it comes through.
Yeah, it's also complexity of the development process. When we look at, we have essentially 3 teams working on the seasonal side. We have our odd teams, so like doing season 1, then season 3, then season 5. We have our even teams doing season 2, season 4, and then we have another team that's focused on what's going on in the live game. And so on top of those 3 teams, who are like, the odds and evens are leapfrogging each other. We've got our live team, and then we actually have an expansion team working as well.
Oh, how many damn teams are work? Yo. Okay, that explains a lot. That explains a lot. And I can relate this to my real world experience actually right now. So I work for a tech company, and we have all these different teams moving in all these different directions, working on different things. And it's very hard to bring people together and be on the same page. And especially because we work remote. I don't know if, I'm assuming with COVID, some of the development of Diablo 4 happened remotely. It's very hard to get everybody on the same page, and things get misinterpreted when they come down the line. You're constantly emailing, you're sending Slack messages. Like, it's very easy to drop the ball somewhere, or things get misconstrued down the line as you're communicating with different teams. And it sounds like things are kind of siloed. Like, does the odd team really know what the even team's working on? Is the expansion team really thinking about the full picture of what's going on in the game currently and taking some of that feedback, and how can we shape and make the game better? You know, it sounds like these people are off in their own team, siloed is kind of the expression that we use in that corporate setting. And you don't want that. At least in my job, like, you don't want that. You want the teams to be collaborative. You want crossover. You want to hear all the ideas that are happening. And when you have teams spread out like this, it explains a lot as to why the game feels a little disjointed. Like, again, I know I keep saying it, but big ups to the art team, the design team, the people that did the graphics, the people that designed the campaign, the animations. Like, all those things are fluid, but the gameplay mechanics are kind of where things get disjointed. The itemization are where things are disjointed, and it feels like it didn't all come together and glue together and mesh and gel. And the more we hear about how these teams are put together and what they're working on and what they're doing and how they do it, it definitely seems like some of this is a byproduct of the way these teams are just separated from one another, and they don't have the congruence to really put it all together in a fashion, especially if they're not playing the game. And I mean, that's constantly what I hear. Like, if you were playing the game, I think you would realize some of these issues. If you took a character from level 1 to, let's say, 80, if everybody had to do that, I think they would really see like what the issues are. But if you're playing in a vacuum and you just play one dungeon, or you already are playing a level 50 or 60 or 70 character and you run a few dungeons, you might not see the issue. When you have to do it over and over and over and over again, like, that's when the problems rear its head. So hearing more about how these teams are working and how they're doing things with the game, I think it really makes a whole lot of sense as to why we're seeing what we're seeing with Diablo 4.
Well, and so when we hear a piece of feedback, there's always a conversation. If we agree with it, then it's like, is this a short term? Hey, we can do that as a hot fix overnight. Is this more of a patch that has to come in 2 weeks? Or actually it's something we're going to address next season, because of the way that, you know, we're a lot of the ways, that's part of the thing. Like, when we put out season one was finished when we released. And so there was no real player feedback yet, other than sort of the beta feedback. But after launch, like, season 1 was kind of done, and so that's why we used that preseason time to tweak as much as we could, and why we, you know, removed the need for the altars of Lilith and that kind of thing. So it's just that notion that, like, the trains are always running, right? The trains are always leaving the station, and what can get on which train is always part of the balancing act of, like, oh yeah, we agree with that feedback. Now which train can we actually?
Rod's very political. Like, he answers some questions without answering the questions. This was a good way to put it. Like, he answered this question well, don't get me wrong, but he could be a politician, man. He does this for real. I don't know about this other guy. Like, he's giving good responses, but like, Rod is like giving the corporate response.
Actually make it on, and are we willing to delay other things to make that happen? Because I think sometimes people just feel like it's always additive, and really it's kind of like there's only so much scope that a team can do. And so to say, like, oh, this new idea wants to come in, well, then that means usually another idea needs to get postponed. And so when we're talking about the prioritization, it's like, oh, we want to do this, are we willing to slow down this other thing? You know, and so that's definitely one of the things, the give and takes you have to do when you're balancing.
I don't want to say misunderstanding, but a lot of the kind of discussion is also attributed to things like the battle pass system and the season model as well.
Battle
And
pass system.
some people say it doesn't feel like it works in Diablo. And,
The fuck?
we've had other people who make games similarly, like the Path of Exile, people looking at it and being like, we're learning a lot from the viability of something like a battle pass model. How
Battle
often do you
pass
kind of
model.
like reassess that, and do you think it does still work in this day and age?
Don't get me wrong, the battle pass is shit. It's terrible. But that's not one of the core problems. Like this is a terrible question.
Especially because it's like a lot of cosmetic stuff and you don't want to upset the balance, and when it is like you can't put a lot of meaningfully changing content in there, is it even worth doing? How do you approach like looking at that kind of system?
I think that's what we're learning now. Like, that's like one of the things is like we're having lots of conversation about the first time we've done something, and so in times we'll come together and we'll go like, hey, everybody, this is one data point, and we're looking at season one and like, what's the battle pass doing? What's the shop doing? What is the seasonal reset doing? How do we feel about it? And it's like, at the end of the day, it's one data point. And so I'm really excited for season 2 on October 17th, because that's now we'll have 2 data points to go like, okay, how many people are playing? How many people are engaging with Battle Pass and Shop? How's it all working? And so I think this is all learning for us. Like, I know people tend to think like, oh, you had 10 years with Diablo 3, you must know everything. And the answer is very different games, very different team. And so and obviously the industry's changed in the last 10 years. So for us, this is a lot of learning for us. So we're going to, make some mistakes as we're trying to make the game better and better.
Yeah. Do you think there's kind of like a different expectation on a team like the Diablo team, or even a developer like Blizzard? Yeah, because obviously you're seen as one of the biggest developers in the world, but the thing that you're introducing is still quite new to you. There's the expectation, well, this is Blizzard. They shouldn't be allowed to stumble or able to stumble. They should know this stuff. Like, how do you kind of like approach that sentiment, knowing that there's no like pushing back against it?
All right, some of these questions are legit. Like, all I can say is you're a multi-billion with a B, billion, multi-billion dollar company. You can't get, and this is not just Diablo 4. This is Overwatch 2. This is the World of Warcraft stuff that's come out. This is so many different things that has happened over the past few years that has just tarnished the reputation of Blizzard as a game developer, that it seems like they're just greedy. They're out for the money grab. They're out for the cash grab. That, yes, like there is an expectation that you should get it right. Like, you should get it right from the start. I don't understand like getting a half a game and you guys are acting like it's cool. Like, oh, like we needed to manage expectations and this and that. Like, manage expectations for what? That we paid full price for a half a game? If you wanted to release it in early access or beta, like that's fine. But like charge us like $20 maybe for the game. And then when it's ready to go a year from now, 2 years from now, because that's what it seems like to me. Like if we go back, like it seems like you didn't learn from D3. How long did it take for D3 to become good? It wasn't until we got the expansion, the Reaper of Souls. So if we're going off of the past and we're going off of what you did there, you can say all you want, it's a new team or it's a different team and blah, blah, blah. But this really is a symptom of all the bad things that have happened over the last few years. And then it's happening to one of the most beloved franchises, Diablo. It's Diablo. People expect this to be right. And especially how you guys marketed this thing. You marketed this to be larger than life, the best Diablo experience, the biggest Diablo experience that we've ever had. And right now it's just a shell of what it can be. The potential's there. Don't get me wrong. Again, I don't want to be super critical or negative, and I know I am being, but it's because this is one of the most beloved franchises. This is the original bar that was set for ARPGs. Do you guys not realize that? Do you not see that with this game? You guys set the bar so high with Diablo 2. It's still coveted as one of the greatest ARPGs of all time. And then the sequel, Diablo 3, didn't live up, to expectations. It was still a fun game. And even at this point, I mean, it's probably funner than Diablo 4, And people are more hyped for the new Diablo 3 season than they are for the Diablo 4, upcoming season. You've already announced season 2. We're what, a month and a half in to season 1. So yes, there are expectations on you. Like, yes, there is a bar, there is a precedent that's been set from past developers that worked on Diablo. And to see what's happened now, like, nobody's saying you can't make mistakes or you can't stumble, but to release the game in the state that it was released in, that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable.
I mean, I think it's just like we're all kind of just working our way through it. It's like sure, we have a lot of benefits of being part of Blizzard, and we had a lot of learnings, and we were able to talk to each other and understand what's going on in WoW and what's going on in Overwatch, and we can talk to each other. But at the end of the day, this team is like doing a live service like this is new for this team, and even we have some D3 veterans and things, but a lot of our team, like, there's a good part of our team where Diablo 4, we were at the launch party where I was like, how many people, this is your first game ever? And like a bunch of hands go up and you're like, this is the very first game they've ever shipped is Diablo 4. And so
explains a lot. Why do you want, I mean, sometimes you do want fresh talent. You want people that have new ideas and things, but if you've never worked on a video game before, why are you part of the Diablo 4 team? I mean, with so many people working on it, obviously there's going to be people that this is their first rodeo, but I hope these people aren't in leadership positions. I hope they're not in charge. I hope they're not in senior positions. Like, every time they open their mouths, they explain so much. It kind of peel back the curtains, especially when you know how corporations work. Like, this is very telling.
So there's definitely like the combination of experience and the ability to access Blizzard, but like we're still going to learn as we go. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I get the, hey, you're Blizzard, you should never make a mistake. But at the same time, like, again, the industry is always changing, the games are always changing, the players are always changing. So it's just going to be learning as we go. And that's why what I love about a live service is we can evolve over time. It's not a fixed state. And so that with each season, and we're going to support the game for years to come, is that we can evolve and learn as we go.
I think what's fascinating about that is because we have a studio like you guys where we very much are like figuring it out as you go along to a degree, and it's kind of like the expectation is, why are you doing this? You should have the perfect product each time, and it's not thought of as great. But then on the flip side, you have a thing like Larian, which just put out one of the best RPGs in a long time, but it was developed over 3 years of iterating, very publicly forward-facing, and people are celebrating that right now. It must be kind of wild to be in an industry where you can have two contradicting kind of like narratives on the same thing going, and like, how do you deal with it on a day-to-day basis as developers?
They all have.
Yo, he came at his neck with that one. Okay, I think this is the last question. Let's see how he answers this, because that was brutal.
I mean, I'm just really happy that this feels like the year of the RPG, when you look at Starfield and Final Fantasy and Hogwarts, and all the stuff that's going on. So I'm just excited to be part of that. And I think they each have their own place when you think about like the turn-based versus the hack and slash versus, the third person versus isometric. Like, I think it's really cool that the RPGs can have such a diversity. And so, I don't know, I just think it's great that RPGs is really coming to the top this year.
All right. So I do want to give them a little bit of credit where credit is due. I mean, if you know anything about somebody coming to you for an interview on the spot and you're not prepared or prepped for it, like, I mean, even I can compare it to my job. Like, if somebody books a meeting with me and I'm not prepared for that meeting to give a presentation, or I don't have my questions right, or my responses like what I know is coming, sometimes you could struggle. And certain people are really good at coming off the top with it and like being very roundabout with the answers, answering without answering. Like Rod does a really good job of that. So I don't want to like dismiss it as just whatever. Like, it seems like they got put on the spot here for this. They probably didn't know what questions were being answered, and some of these questions were pretty tough. So I do want to give credit where credit is due, but I also want to point out, I mean, just so much makes sense from hearing more from these campfire chats, seeing the developers play the game, now seeing how some of these questions were answered in this interview. We're basically dealing with, I mean, a brand new team, of course, of potentially a lot of inexperience, people that seem to maybe not be gamers first. I don't want to make that assumption, but I mean, a lot of what we've seen from the Dev Play series, there's 3 of them. And obviously people are bashing the most recent one, but all 3 of them, these people don't look like they know how to play the game whatsoever. So, I mean, you combine those factors, you combine it with the siloed teams, development over courses of years where things have probably been scrapped. And again, I can relate this to my job in the tech space. I mean, I'm at a SaaS company, and there's this concept of an MVP, a minimum viable product, where you're going to put out basically the bare bones version of a product, and you're going to let your customers give you the feedback. So you still make revenue, you still make sales, but you're able to have your customers test that product and give you the feedback that you need to make it better. So that first iteration is not what the product is actually going to end up being. And you test it and you test it, and there's revisions and there's a product roadmap, and you take that customer feedback and you break it down into, okay, what's viable to actually do quickly? What's going to take a long time? What's going to take the most resources? What's going to make people happiest, but at the same time still increase our sales? I mean, companies are run by sales and marketing, unfortunately. Instead of product, instead of development, sales and marketing are the ones that bring in the money. So they're the ones that get the say so in a lot of these things, and not the people that make the product. And I mean, if you really look at it through that scope and that lens, I think that's exactly what we have going on here. Again, I know this video is very long, so I don't want to keep rambling on, but I wanted to react to this. Again, I picked up D4 again, and I've actually been enjoying my time. Like, I don't want to sit here and completely bash it. I have been enjoying my time with it, but I can see the issue as I'm going to push on. I'm playing a sorceress, and as I push, to get into World Tier 4 and try to get to 100, I don't even know if that's possible, but I'm getting ready to make another character here, probably a barbarian, and trying to level that up as well simultaneously. I can see where the cracks in the game are really starting to show. With the specifically, the itemization isn't very fun. There's not enough dopamine hits from the items in the game. And then there's not a mode. Like, if there's a mode that's fun enough to keep doing over and over again, that's fine. That can be your in-game content as long as that mode is fun enough. We can point back to Greater Rifts and Diablo 3. Like, it was a lot of fun to play those. In Nightmare Dungeons, it's the layout of the dungeons, it's the backtracking, it's how long they take to do. It's just not all that fun. And you've already done so many dungeons. There's so many dungeons in the game if you're trying to get all the aspects. Like, there's just too many dungeons in the game. And then you start running the nightmare variants of the dungeons, and it just becomes so tedious, so repetitious. The grind to get XP and level up your glyphs and all the things that you need to do takes such a long time that over time it's just not that fun, and it really starts to show how bad some of these systems are. So again, I don't want to be overly negative. Like, they have put their foot forward in the right direction. I'm not saying that whatsoever. They have definitely put their foot forward in the right direction. I think it's going to take a lot of time. Again, I know how some of these things work. I'm not in a game development company. Like, this is a SaaS company, but how long it takes to actually implement changes sometimes, and getting approval from higher ups and who wants to spend the budget and coming up with the roadmap for it. And then other things come up that are more important and things get shelved. And the train analogy is very, very good that they made here of, what's going to be on time, what's going to be late, what are you going to delay to make something come out? All those things are very valid. So I can definitely see a little bit behind the curtain as to what they're explaining, and I get it with what I do for my job. I get it. But again, this is Diablo. If all these things were going on, like, these things should have been ironed out before launch, a lot of these. So anyway, I appreciate you guys as always. I know you know what to do. I'm going to catch you on the next one. Let me know what you think on the comments below. Subscribe. Peace.